for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Agile.FM. Today I have Sandy Mamoli with me. Her Twitter handle is smamol, M-A-M-O-L, with an S in front of it. She's an Austrian native. She moved to New Zealand. You can hear that in a second from her New Zealandish accent. She's founded Nomad 8, that is a consultancy based out of New Zealand. She's in Auckland. She's an international speaker. She is an author, for example, of the book How Self-Selecting Lets People Excel. That's from the Pragmatic Bookshelf. That was written in 2015 with David Moe. And last but not least, and this is quite an impressive thing we want to start with, she's an Olympian, the sport of handball. Well, first of all, welcome to the podcast, Sandy.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. So the sport is handball. That is an indoor event. What Olympic Games are we talking about? Which year?
We're talking a long time ago. It was 1992 in Barcelona.
In Barcelona. Fantastic. And I do understand you do speak and you work a lot in Europe, Northern Europe, etc. So you also refer to yourself as a gadget junkie?
Yes. So maybe if I just explain why my accent is all over the place and how
Sure.
I got to be a gadget junkie with a weird accent. I grew up in Austria and spent the first half of my life as a professional athlete playing handball, and then at some point I got offered a contract in Denmark where I played for about 13 years, and from there I moved on to New Zealand. Mm-hmm. So I started out with professional sports, moved into software development, and found my love for technology and pursued a career in technology after my handball career. Mm-hmm. And after that, I found out that I had been doing Agile since 2002 or 2003. And it came as a complete surprise to me that not the entire world was doing that. I'd been living in a bubble, and that what prompted me to become an Agile coach.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. The gadget junkie, I want to explore a little bit with you. What was the latest, coolest gadget you acquired or you're currently aiming to acquiring?
I have nothing right now. I just got an iPhone 10, which is now quite old too, but I do like love the face recognition technology.
Yeah.
And I'm going back to remembering just my very first iPhone that I imported from the US that you had to jailbreak, and since then I've had that fascination.
Wow, nice. Okay, so you are out of New Zealand. I have myself been to New Zealand. It's a long flight. Pretty much
Yes.
From everywhere in this world you go, and New Zealand is a long flight. Isn't consulting from New Zealand as a base a challenge because of the flight times? How you guys doing this down there?
It totally is a challenge, and that's also why I don't work that much in Europe, don't work that much in the States. But there are planes, and everything for us that's one flight away is practically around the corner. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it makes me mainly focused on New Zealand in my work, and then I go out and get my fix of the real world and or the rest of the world by speaking at conferences all over the world, attending conferences, and also doing like short stints when I work for a week or some days somewhere else in the world.
Mm-hmm. So New Zealand is the home of the All Blacks, and let's take this to Agile, right? A lot of people, Agile coaches out there use the All Blacks, and obviously, I don't know if it's a dance or it's an opening or a celebration of some sort to kick things off in an Agile manner, obviously from a funniest perspective. But you did write this book, How Self-Selecting Lets People Excel. And it's all about self-selecting, not self-organizing. We can talk a little bit about this, the differentiation here a little bit. But It's about self-selecting teams. Now, obviously, the few things I want to learn from you is in my practical work with clients, there's not much self-selecting going on. Let's say, except the initial selecting, I want to join a company through an interview process or something. There is some selection going on, but then once you're inside a company, there's not much self-selection going on. Why is it so important for you to offer to select?
Well, I'm a strong believer that people do their best work, the most motivated if they can choose what they work on and who they work with. And I've always been puzzled by why this hasn't been made possible for people in organisations, because there's just some combinations of people that work really well together in cross-functional teams and others aren't. And the way we usually form teams is that there are managers going, hey, you, or whoever happens to be free at a certain point in time, and put them into a team. And I think even if they are very often well-intentioned, they have less knowledge than the people who are actually on the teams, who they would gel with, who they would make a good combination with. So we started at some point, David Moore and I started at some point putting that problem to the people in the company. We were in a situation where we said, right, we are going agile, we need to have those 250 people and we need to put them into teams. And realised we were doing it all wrong with management selection. It was complicated. People were not necessarily happy where we were going to place them. And we said, actually, you're the people who are responsible adults. We trust you to come up with a solution that's better than what we would be able to come up with. Let's go, hey, those are the teams we need. How about you tell us who should be in which team? And developed a facilitated process for how to do that, because just throwing people into a room and saying, hey, go knock yourself out, probably would not have worked.
Yeah. So, why is it so important? I mean, like, this is obviously what you're describing, putting them into a room. Does the location where people are influence the selection process? Let's say somebody's listening to us right now, thinking, "Hey, I work in a corporate environment, all distributed across the globe. How would like self-selection process look like this, and why is it so important in an environment like this, right?" Yeah, so more like the distributed factor. I don't know if you can comment a little bit on that as well. I mean, there's obviously some limitations to technology, right?
Yes. So in general, like, my preference is when I have a company that's in several locations, I would make fully formed teams in each location and have teams coordinate with each other rather than having individual splits across locations. And then have a self-selection in each location. So each of those can have self-selected co-located teams. Sometimes that's not possible, and we need to have distributed teams. And I know there's a number of companies who've taken that approach and have taken that facilitation approach and just digitized it, where things happen in different locations and then it's visualized through, for example, Trello, or people virtually put their photo into the team or the squad they want to be in, and then check in and then have another round. So it does work too. That being said, whenever you're not in the same room, there is an overhead in communication, whether that is work or self-selection. It's doable, but there is some overhead.
Yeah, there are some coaches. There's even a lot of literature around this to keep teams consistent together over a longer period of time, sometimes even across projects. How often do you invite for this self-selection process, and does it disrupt these kind of consistent teams out there?
Yeah, I actually agree. I think teams should be stable-ish, meaning if they're together, I think there is some stagnation after 2 years if there's no change. If you rip them apart every month, every 2 months, then you'll never get to a high-performance team. My preference is to enable self-selection every 6 to 9 months, where people get the opportunity to move teams. That being said, what happens is everyone thinks that if we do that every 6 months, we've got to you start from scratch. But in my experience, that would be like maybe one team member shifting out, maybe two. So it's very little movement. It's just it's very often a check-in that, hey, everyone's still happy in their teams. Yes. So there is movement, but just because people get the chance to do this every 6 months, they don't necessarily shift every 6 months.
Yeah.
Good number in my experience is 9 to 12 months.
9 to 12 months, yeah. On your book, on the product page on Amazon, there is a statement, where you make, this is not about self-organization, this is about self-selection. What's the difference? If the listeners out there might just think, what's the difference between these two? Is this another term? Is this a subset? How would you explain that?
Self-organization happens within the team, where a team self-organizes in order to achieve a goal. Like nobody tells anyone else what to do; they self-organize. And self-selection is, how do you get into the team in the first place? How do you design or create that team in the first place? So it's kind of a level of abstraction higher.
Do you have any metrics, any kind of evidence around this by obviously having done this and applying this concept? Is there anything where you can draw from some of the experience where you can say there is a clear evidence that this self-selection process has a positive impact on X, Y, Z, whatever those variables are?
Yeah, we have surveys that we have done with all the companies we've done this with, and they were mainly around employee engagement and employee satisfaction, and those numbers have gone up a lot. We have tried to measure productivity, but that's always really hard in software development, especially if you go from a situation where you have no teams to self-selected teams. Then very often that's you don't really have a baseline. So there's some indicators that productivity is going up, that people get more done. Absolute scientific proof I don't have about that.
Yeah.
What I do have is the engagement surveys where people actually are trending upwards.
Yeah, I mean, we see it in a variety of places, right, out there working with teams, that it just makes people more engaged by having an option and making the decisions themselves. Why not on a team selection process, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Have you ever heard the question that nobody would select anything, like the fear of management often when they deploy like ideas like this, that somebody might say, what if nobody selects anything? What if nobody on the team would do that? Like that common fear of, what if these concepts don't work? What am I supposed to do?
Totally. Very often, and I've worried about them too. And the thing is, there's the worry about what if we have a team or a squad that nobody wants to work in. And first of all, what happens is, just because I think something is really boring doesn't mean someone else thinks it's really boring. So I found that from my side and also manager's side, it's projecting what they don't like that nobody else would like. So normally it's someone else. What I think is boring, someone else finds super exciting and wants to do. Some people love to do BAU. I don't. So usually it's not a problem. Once we have had that where nobody wanted to sign up for a squad, and it made us realize actually we shouldn't have that squad, and it was a bad idea to have that in the first place.
Have you seen a team selection, self-selection process also span like the idea, the concept from an agile team, let's say to the rest of the organization? So, for example, open space, work assignments, etc. Does that have an impact on other parts of the organization once you start doing this on an agile team?
Yes, I've seen that spread, and I've seen people take a huge interest. I have not seen and yes, as you say, in open space and kind of hackathons that are not necessarily software related.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
What and that was great. What I haven't seen but would love to see is now that we go more into business agility, and some of our teams are so cross-functional that they are both tech and marketing and legal, and have a wider cross-functionality than just technology, that they can be self-selected. I have not managed to push it that far, and I think that's basically because in tech we have experimented with Agile for the last 20 years, so we are riding the edge of a wave, and there are other people who are still trying to find the way to the beach.
Right.
And we need to help them, but maybe it's pushing it a bit too far to do everything at the same time.
Yeah, so, no, definitely. I understand there's obviously room for improvement. There's other things that come into the mix and new industries, right, that might borrow ideas from there. So there's a lot to explore. Do you have, let's say somebody's listening to this, somebody might be in a traditional management position right now, and they might be intrigued by the idea and want to try it out. Do you have any kind of a quick tip? I know the big tip is buy the book, but the quick tip of what is a good starting point for starting a self-selection process, and what needs to be considered, what kind of things you would say that is an indicator for you might be challenged with self-selection, what might be something you feel like would be a good starting point?
I think the one thing I'd start with is can you organize a hackathon? And if you can organize a 24-hour hackathon where people can choose what they work on and who they work with, and that is a success and people enjoy it, then you're in a good position to think about self-selection.
Okay.
Because if they can figure out how to do that for 24 hours, they and their managers will have confidence that it's possible because they've just done it. So how about we do this? We almost have a hackathon every day, and people still get to choose what they work on and who they work with.
Yeah, that's an awesome tip. Yeah.
So my recommendation would be to start with that, and then to read the book, because I've spent a very long time writing this as a how-to. There's not much theory or anything behind it. It's basically it's a guide for if you want to do this, here's a step-by-step guide.
Right, so that's an awesome tip within hackathon, right? It's also a different kind of concept for many organizations still today. We do talk a lot about it, but the implementation of it is very limited outside of our group, obviously. But what if, like, let's say the self-selection process does not go as smooth as possible? Isn't there like a lot of room for personal conflict? Have you observed anything out of this? Just, coming back to the scenario before, what if somebody doesn't want to pair with somebody or team up with someone? Or
it's extremely rare. The whole idea of that's the poor kid in the schoolyard that doesn't get picked, for example, doesn't happen because nobody picks you. So you put your photo to the squad you want to be in, and then you have a discussion like, do you have all the skills? Can you, as this group, can you manage to deliver end to end and fulfill your purpose? If yes, then your squad is good, but you still have a check-in with everyone else. Does that mean that other squads cannot also fulfill their purpose? Or would it be better that you go somewhere else? So you have that negotiation, and you also do it against the backdrop of is there's actually what's best for the company. Because this is not just about self-actualization, it is also about solving a problem for your company and finding out who should be in which team. It's just you as a team member are tasked with that and not your manager. And conflicts actually don't happen. Like, there are people who don't want to work with each other, and that's fair enough. And what I've observed is if they end up in the same squad, then one takes their photo and puts it somewhere else. Happens maybe a couple of times, and that's fine. They don't need to work together if they don't want to.
Right. Well, if you have a very passive approach by moving pictures around, right, maybe the conflict does not come up at all, right? So
Yes.
It's like this unspoken thing. It's not coming up, and we're still picking the best
Yeah.
possible teams for us.
Yes.
Yeah, great idea. Towards the end of our podcast, I just want to come back to this, to the Olympic Games. You're an Olympian. Do you have, I know there are some talks you're giving, how does this concept of sport connect to what you're actually describing here in terms of agility and what you wrote in your book? Is there any connection between the two topics?
I think there's actually a huge connection in that is that it's a small group of people who are driven by a really compelling goal they absolutely want to achieve, who overcome diversity, who overcome conflicts, to collaborate to achieve something together. So I think there are huge parallels there, and I think both areas can learn from each other. And one of the main things that I think is important for agile teams is that we are getting good at dealing with failure, but I think we can get a hell of a lot better, because what an athlete does is we use failure as our fuel. We don't have our medals on the wall. We have a piece of paper in our wallet with the newspaper clipping of when we really lost a big game. And we use that to get us up in the morning and to fuel our motivation. So I think that's something that we could learn. I also think that there are some similarities in how to pick a team. When I do self-selection, I recommend people to ask themselves, so what can I learn? What can I teach? And what's fair to my company? On a sports team, I would go for mainly what can I learn, or pick the best, or be the worst player on the best team that will still accept you.
Yeah, especially
that's how you learn.
Yeah, especially on team sports, right? The concepts are pretty much they go from one to the other, and if you want to see like we're all professionals at work, right? In terms of conflict, decision making, and seeing the bigger goal. And I think the same is true for sports teams, especially when you go to Olympic Games. You have a goal, and you want to have a team approach to achieving this goal. So the selection process is guided by a goal. Sandy, I want to thank you for carving out some time and talking about this very important topic. I hope a lot of folks out there who are in positions of building teams are getting something out of this podcast, and they got some tips. And if there is one tip, and that is that there's also a book, Creating Great Teams, that was written from you, Sandy, and David Moll, and that is How Self-Selecting Lets People Excel, from the Pragmatic Bookshelf. Just want to point everybody at the end to that book. I'm also going to have it on the show page, and I wish you a very nice long flight back home to New Zealand. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.